My name is Victoria Will, and I am a portrait and advertising photographer here in New York with a focus on portraiture. I came through this through photojournalism, so I actually call it portraitage. It's not really my word, but I think it describes what I do pretty well. And I'm here to talk to you about a project of tintype portraits that I made at the Sundance Film Festival that ended up going viral, which was wild to me. Before I get to the specific project, I need to give you some background on what it's like to shoot at Sundance, since that explains how I arrived at the idea. So when I was assigned to shoot Sundance, I knew that I was going to be set up in a portrait studio, and I would have control over the light. But what I didn't know was what the space was going to be. I didn't know what my subjects were going to be wearing, and I didn't know how much time I was going to have with them, and it turns out little to none. It's a lot like a portrait boot camp. We shoot 300 to 400 people over the course of 5 days, and this is my first year in the lobby of a pet store where I set up a studio. I decided to make a chalkboard the first year because I wanted it to be collaborative. My hope was to have each subject draw something. Oh, there we go. Is that better? Sorry about that. My hope was to have each subject draw something related to the film they were promoting. But as it turns out, Kerry Washington is the only actor who actually knows how to draw. So the next year I decided I wanted to get the most options out of my situation and try to come away with a collective body of work that I could show. So I made portable fabric backgrounds. I would move them in and out of the set based on what people were wearing. The pictures ran well that year, and it was a good collection because they were cohesive, but by no means did they go viral. The third year I decided I wanted to use textured backgrounds with more classic lighting. That way I could focus on the portraits and not the set. This gave the images a more timeless feel, and looking back, I felt that the fabric background started to feel dated. Every year is a challenge to figure out what to do next, how to evolve the work, and how to evolve as a photographer. I'm always looking for inspiration anywhere I can find it. That's when I ended up at Photoville, the photo festival in Brooklyn. When I was there, I stopped at the Penumbra Foundation photo booth, and I ended up having a tintype made of myself. There it is. This is where the idea came from. I instantly knew it was an amazing process and one that I had to learn. I was so enamored by it, I felt that if I had this reaction to it, that all of the people that I photographed at Sundance would probably feel the same way, because it was tangible and we were actually making something, and I knew that it would feed sort of the creative juices that Sundance needs. So I spent the year figuring out the logistics, researching, reading books, watching a million YouTube videos on how to make tintypes, and talking to tintypists who are willing to share their knowledge. After I'd done enough research and it seemed possible, I decided to try them alongside the digital portraits that I was being hired to shoot. So at this point, I had no idea if these images were going to see the light of day, and I wasn't really very worried about it. That was something I planned to address afterward if the project was successful. But I Instagrammed this image of us mixing chemistry, and a photo editor at Esquire saw it and contacted me, telling me that they were interested, which was great, especially since the photos weren't made yet, and that was an incredible leap of faith on her part. But it was also an added element of pressure for me. So it began. I set it up and I hoped for the best, and I really had no idea how people would react. But what happened was that the relationship between me and the subject completely shifted. It was different than any of the other years I'd been there. And it went from me needing to capture a quick portrait of the subject while they moved on to the next studio, to the two of us sitting down, talking about it, and creating something together and really making a collaboration. The publicists were no longer dictating the parameters of my shoots. People even wanted to hang around and hang around in the darkroom and see what the process was, which was a complete breath of fresh air for me. I'd never experienced anything like it. In fact, Anne Hathaway's publicist wouldn't let me photograph her individually, but when she saw what we were doing, she told him to leave the room so that we could make one anyway. Then Maggie Gyllenhaal asked me if she could take her shirt off for a portrait, and under normal circumstances at Sundance, that would never happen. But she was really interested. She actually decided, she left, went on with her day, and came back to try to make a second tintype. So the thing about them is that they are painstaking and a very finicky process. The ISO is roughly ISO 1, which requires an extraordinary amount of light. And the entire process from making the plate to shooting it to developing it has to happen while it's wet, which is why it's also called the wet plate process. But with my time constraints, I really could only make one of each willing participant, unless I wanted to come back for more. But because of inexperience and the unpredictable nature of the chemistry, my images have a lot of chemical contamination. These are known as artifacts. They're all the ghosting images and sort of white squiggles you see everywhere. So it turns out one of the things that I thought was the most beautiful about the images was actually considered a mistake by tintypists. But that actually didn't seem to matter. The link went out on Esquire and ended up having a life of its own, far surpassing anything I could have imagined. The project really resonated with people, but as you can expect, everyone has their opinion. And the tintypists were the loudest, constantly criticizing my technique. But my favorite comments were people saying, "What's the big deal? I can do that on my iPhone." But the surprising popularity of the project allowed me to try it again, and I knew that I wanted a second try. I had spent time over the year learning the process better and really refining it. So with more knowledge behind me, I asked the Penumbra Foundation to come and help me really streamline the system, the folks who had inspired me to do it in the first place. I was also 8.5 months pregnant, so I couldn't handle the chemistry because it's toxic. So by having Penumbra there, I was able to remove the variable of the process and focus on the portraiture. While I personally think each collection has its own merit, the second set of images may be stronger portraits, and the tintypes are definitely technically improved. However, the collection didn't have the same impact as the first. Maybe what made the first set so successful was the uniqueness of it, or the imperfections, or maybe that you were seeing recognizable faces in such a raw way. I really don't know. Esquire ended up telling me that it was one of the most read and shared links of all of the Hearst publications that year. But the other two more popular links were a puppy video and a listicle of funny misspellings that Starbucks baristas put on your cup. So needless to say, the internet is a complete mystery to me, but that's never been my motivation. For me, it was interesting to see something go viral, and it absolutely boosted my visibility as a photographer. At the same time, I worried that it defined who I was when people started to refer to me as the tintype girl. I also had to consciously try not to pressure myself to always create a viral project, which is, of course, highly unlikely and not something that I was anticipating. So now I just continue to take jobs that interest me and I try to challenge myself as much as possible, but I have no expectation of how the internet will react because your guess is as good as mine. Thank you.